We have Nathan Friedman, the CEO of HemaSense, which is a fascinating medtech company that is developing a post-surgical monitoring system. He's going to tell us a bit about from idea to impact, prioritizing efficiency in early medtech R&D. And let me say, I talked to him, I don't know, maybe a month ago, and he is much further on his R&D at HemaSense than he was a month ago. I'm impressed. So this is a perfect talk. Nathan, go.
Awesome. Well, thank you, John. I appreciate you pulling this all together. This has been a really great set of talks so far, and I'm hoping that I can add to that list, but also I think key into some of the things that some of the previous presenters said, I think actually dovetails really nice with what I'm talking about. Yeah, again, CEO of HemaSense, and I'm going to talk about not necessarily kind of the whole list of things that you should be considering, but like how do you take that list and kind of start to wrangle it and prioritize when you're in, what is essentially a resource starved situation, which many of us are in, especially in the early phases. So before I kind of jump into detail on that topic, I want to give you a little background of myself, who I am, where I'm coming from with this topic, because I think it gives some context. So I am a mechanical materials engineer by training, graduated from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and I currently live in Flagstaff, Arizona. I've been here for about 20 years now. And the reason I came to Flagstaff, Arizona is because out of college, I got a job with W.L. Gore and Associates. I think most people in the medtech space have heard of W.L. Gore and Associates, big multinational company. I think they're over 4 billion in sales now and 12,000 people worldwide. But the medical division for many, many years, and still I think is the case, is really headquarters here in Flagstaff, Arizona. So I came out here and immediately jumped into product design and development for cardiovascular and structural heart devices, worked on a lot of the branch devices in the aortic space, and actually the device on the right that you see, which is their septal occluder, was really my first device that I really helped through development. And spent 19 years at W.L. Gore and Associates, and through that I think had a similar experience to a lot of people who have gone through these large companies. You get a great education in hands-on how to develop a medical device, especially when it comes to complex devices like this that are implantable and have these very long timelines. I mean, rule of thumb was like 7 to 9 years of development before one of these devices was fully released to the market. Part of that experience, I also, as many companies do, kind of went through the gamut of different tools that were the tool du jour at these companies. I think we probably talked to all the major consulting firms that you hear about. You kind of over the years start to distill down which of these tools you really resonate with and which ones don't seem like a great fit for you. The company's going to find the next new tool and bring that to you, and it's really up to you to kind of figure out how to take that forward. And so that's really kind of the basis of my talk, and I like to say that because I came from that background. So I've seen a lot of the tools that were mentioned in some of the previous talks, and I'm going to share with some of the ones that really work for me now that I'm out of Gore. I also like to kind of take a quick diversion. About 12 years ago, I actually started a microbrewery here in Flagstaff as well. This was just because of my entrepreneurial spirit. At the time, and Gore was going through some transitions, I did this in addition to my job at Gore. Wanderlust Brewing Company grew from me on evenings and weekends, in addition to my engineering job, to about 10 employees, statewide distribution, a really nice tap room with a focus on Belgian and German beers. And I sold that business about 2 years ago. So I'm out of that business. Consequently, left Gore about a year and a half ago as they were going through another reorg, because I wanted to get back to kind of my entrepreneurial roots and really play in this entrepreneurial startup space in the medtech world. I am an instructor for iCore as well, which I know was mentioned in our first talk today. This is a great program to help de-risk a lot of early phase stuff. So I'm a huge proponent of that, and I'll put in the plug if people haven't been involved in that. And it's a free program as well, so really great one. But really, the bulk of my time now is spent on HemaSense. So HemaSense, which I'll kind of interject a few of our experiences at HemaSense, is a early phase device company that is making a wearable monitoring device, and we are specifically focused at detecting subcutaneous bleeding events following surgeries in general, but our first application is really around catheter-based surgeries. So when you have a catheter that goes in for femoral access for a heart valve or a stent graft, something like that, there's a pretty high rate of bleeding at that access site. And right now, the only way of detecting that is visual inspections by a nurse every 15, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever they have time for. And we can do that continuously. And so this is really where I've had the opportunity. We started this about 8, 9 months ago to bring to bear a lot of the prioritization and efficiencies that I learned at Gore and in my other endeavors to try and help move us quickly through this early phase. I don't think I have to state this, but I like putting it up here just as a reminder that all of us are struggling. It is not an easy thing. We have all made the decision to play in a highly regulated, very complicated, long timeline space. And we've done that because there's a lot of good we can do for everybody who is involved in this ecosystem, whether it is the payers or the physicians, and especially the patients. And that, I think, is what draws a lot of us to this. But we want to make sure we have that perspective that this is complex and there are a huge number of different considerations and different priorities that may pull you 100 different directions on a daily basis. And this word cloud is by no means prioritized by size or color or anything like that. And that's intentional because every company is going to have a different set of priorities that they need to focus on at that point in time. And that's really what I want to kind of acknowledge and try and help tease out and give you a little bit of a framework to think about how to prioritize that depending on where you're at. We're all trying to compete with timelines, how much money, how many resources do we have? And as a CEO or, a founder, you have to figure out how to deploy those, especially considering you probably don't have a lot of all of them. I don't think any of us have enough of all three of these that we feel like we're set and it's not, keeping us up at night. So that's kind of the first acknowledgement. What I like to do is I love frameworks that I can use very quickly and easily to do frequent check-ins on, are we doing the right thing at the right time? And so what I'm going to give you is this framework that I use. Full acknowledgement to, the work I did at Gore is derived from several of the frameworks that we use there. But I think it's a simplistic form that kind of helps you work through what are the biggest uncertainties that we need to be thinking about right now, and how do we prioritize those uncertainties and which ones we're going to de-risk first. Jolly talked a lot about de-risking these uncertainties and had that really nice chart that we had on the screen about these kind of 5 or 6 areas that we look in. This is a similar set of questions, but puts it in a format that, at least for me, has been very valuable to have these kind of quick check-ins so that we can readjust priorities as our situation changes. So I put them in 3 categories. The first one is technical. This is what we commonly think of as the product-related development uncertainties. Can we build something? Can we prove it works? Can we deliver it reliably? What is the actual product that we are delivering? Whether it is a physical medical device, whether it is a software solution, whether it is a therapeutic. There are some sort of technical uncertainties, and these are the things that I think are actually, in a lot of cases, the easiest ones to think about, because these are the ones that are more than likely directly under our control as a company. This is inside our walls most of the time. I can deploy more people on it, I can deploy more money to it, and try and accelerate this and make it go faster. The second one is really from that external perspective. We talk a lot about product market fit, problem solution fit, finding that right customer, all of those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, it boils down to, does anybody care enough about what we're building and what service we're delivering and what problem we're solving that they will adopt it and pay us for it? And I'll dig into a little bit more on each of these in the next few slides, but these are kind of the high level concepts that I keep in mind when I'm thinking about these categories. And this is really external. These are things that we don't a lot of times have control over, but we need to understand them because this is the environment that we are working within. Then the third one is really where you bring all this together, and that is the business itself. This is the company, this is the funding, this is the business opportunity. Do these things come together from the technical category and the market category to create a viable business? Is this real? Can we execute on it? What are the pieces we have to have in place from almost a nuts and bolts, the right people, the right financing, the right timelines, the right regulatory kind of pathway, that we actually have a business? Because at the end of the day, we are not building charities, we are building businesses. And that is fundamental for these endeavors to actually move forward and be successful. You can't just have a cool widget that doesn't actually turn into a profitable business at some point, or it's never going to be viable. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take a similar approach to kind of what Jolly showed on that last slide. Is there was a framework at Gore that I kind of derived this from called the Real Win Worth framework. It's been around for a long time. Basically, instead of these 3 categories, it uses the questions: is this opportunity real? Can we win? And is it worth doing? As a part of that that exercise, no matter how you slice those, it basically is based around a series of questions that you can ask with a group of people that you have a candid discussion with and say, what do we know and what do we not know? And what do we need to go find out? So that's what I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you some of these questions that help prompt me in these different categories, and then give you some examples of how we've attacked this here at HemaSense. So first off, the technical risk or product risk, as I mentioned, the can we build it, prove it works, and deliver it reliably? And again, we can share these slides. Happy to share these with anybody. This is also a subset of kind of my longer list of questions, but these are the ones that I think about the most. So when we think about technical, fundamentally in the early stages, one of the biggest questions, and this was one we wrestled with at HemaSense, is does the technology exist to accomplish this solution or to build a product around, or do we need to develop it? Either one will work, but you need to be very aware of what the implications are if that technology doesn't exist and you have to develop it. Now we're talking a little bit more of a science project. This is what happens in the universities. This is where a lot of these government grants were funding, things like that. Probably not investment ready if you're doing this early technology development, so you need to be aware of that. Can we build it and demonstrate that it works in the setting that we think it needs to go into? If we're working in a physician's, general practitioner office versus working in a large hospital system versus, working in a specialist outpatient clinic, you need to understand how you're going to work within that environment and what are the constraints there. And that really comes down to compatibility with devices and processes. And then ultimately, once you have that design, what data do you need to prove that it's safe, effective, and reliable? I can tell somebody all day long that what I have is great, but their first response is probably going to be show me the data, because at the end of the day, you need that to back up your efficacy and whether you're actually safe and whether you're reliable. Can you actually accomplish it, and what proof do you have? This can be one of the hardest things to do in these long development processes, because you could be years out from ever doing some sort of human trial, and you have to build the evidence base without ever putting this in a person that it is going to indeed save somebody's life or improve their condition. That can be a really tough challenge, but it is very critical for you to start thinking about early, because if you don't have a pathway to that, you need to put a lot of work into that and figure that out. And then finally, manufacturing or deploying this at scale. That's really critical. You can build one, but can you build 1,000? Can you build 10,000? Can you scale from one customer to 100 customers to 10,000 customers? So at HemaSense, I mentioned that we're making a wearable device. The actual computation, electronics, things like that, very much off the shelf. And actually the materials that we're using in this for our skin contact electrode patch are off the shelf as well. But we knew from the start that all of the wireless communication, control systems, data processing, that exists. That is not our biggest uncertainty. But if we don't have the right skin interface and the right electrode configuration to actually get good data off of our patient, we've got nothing. This is probably the 6th iteration of our electrode patch that we have done in the last 4 months, because this was our biggest uncertainty at this stage. I don't care if it's hooked up to, 4 prototype boards and 3 laptops to gather that data. If I don't have good data coming in, then I have nothing. So we started there. That took us 4 months to develop. The electronics that are attached to it took about a month and a half, because we pull that off the shelf. We know what we need at that point. We've de-risked that biggest uncertainty from a technical standpoint. Now we can go out and tackle the next uncertainty, which is getting data that shows what we need to filter out, how we need to process that data, what we need to do to actually start showing signal to noise ratio that will allow us to actually diagnose these conditions early. So that's where we're at right now. Again, this is a sequential de-risking, but focusing on what's the biggest uncertainty in this category. So the next category, and I think this is something that we hear all the time, is market and adoption. How big is this market? Are people willing to pay for it? Are you treating 3 people at a rural hospital somewhere, or do you have, 1 million patients that all need this problem? We also need to understand, who are we solving this problem for? And, one of the previous talks spoke about who are the stakeholders, who are the decision makers, who will drive adoption of your product. You need to understand that, because you could be going and selling to the doctors and they have no say whatsoever in what actually gets brought into a hospital. Or you're talking to, the hospital value committees, and at the end of the day, actually you're at a hospital system where the doctors has that say, or the nurse is the one who actually benefits from it. So you need to understand all of those things and figure out, is this a top problem? And is this something that you can actually go and solve? And that you're going to get adoption if you solve that problem. We talked about integrating into workflows already. Again, comes down to evidence. How are we going to start building evidence to drive adoption with these clinicians or with these health systems or whoever that stakeholder is? What is that burden of proof? This has actually been something we've hit really hard with HemaSense because we have an economic value proposition and we need to understand like how much better do we need to be? How much money do we need to save for the hospital? How many of these costly complications do we need to eliminate that will actually drive meaningful adoption? And it's a hard thing to tease out, but it's very critical. And so we need to tease that out as early as we can. Reimbursement, I think everybody's starting to think about that. If you're not, you need to be because it is very critical. Do you have a reimbursement pathway or is there an economic rationale? And then again, is this patient population big enough to matter? For us, I think this was a very clear problem. We know that hematomas and bleeding complications are a problem, but how many of these are there? How many procedures have this problem? Are we talking about just one procedure type or is it across the board? This is a set of data that we spent a lot of time wrapping our head around and trying to get a hold of. And once we formulated that, we validated that left, right, in 6 ways from Sunday with all of these physicians to say, does this make sense? Is this what you're seeing in your clinic? And we've gotten to the point actually where we've validated it with so many of them that I'm getting papers sent to me before I even see them because they're like pre-publication papers that we've got physicians who say, hey, here's another data set. This also validates what you're trying to do. It'll be published in the next 2 weeks. Keep an eye out for it. It's this kind of virtuous cycle where we're able to validate the data and then that starts building awareness where we can then bring that back in and you start to see that in more and more places. And so I'd encourage you to kind of tackle this early and then not just take it at face value, but go out and validate that as well with the actual practitioners. And then finally, business and execution. And this is one that I think we all struggle with on a day-to-day basis. This includes things like funding and capital strategy and burn rates and things like that, but really making sure that you've looked at this business portion from a lot of different angles and understand, is this your biggest uncertainty today? What is your runway? Do you have the right people? All those kinds of things. And I think actually this last question, which Saul talked a lot about, is this fundable? Does this make sense to an investor? I went to LSI this year for the first time. I'm sure a lot of people have been to LSI before out in Dana Point. And there was these fireside chats, I think they called them or something like that in the evening where they had a panel of people and they just had some really candid discussions. And there was one that had a couple investors, a couple founders, and a couple people who were founders turned investors. I apologize. I don't remember who it was who said it because I was like standing at the back, but it was like this one statement that just resonated with me so perfectly. He said, you know what? I was a founder. I was out there, hitting the streets trying to find investors. And one of the most important things that you can remember as a CEO is you are selling 2 products. You are selling the actual product you're building, and those customers are the hospitals, are the physicians, are the patients, but you are also selling an investment. You are selling an investment to your investors. They don't care if you have the greatest product in the world if it's not a smart investment, because that's why they're in this. Yes, they have their focus areas, they have their thesis, they have their timeframes, they have the profile of companies they look for, but ultimately you are not selling them your product. You are selling them an investment in your company so they can make a return on it. And I think that simple statement helped me reformulate how I'm thinking about a lot of these meetings with investors, because that's what you're selling to them. Yes, they have to have faith that they have to have evidence and they have to have the belief that your product is going to be successful. At the end of the day, it sounds kind of crass, but in a lot of cases, it's not because it's going to help people save a lot of lives. It's because it's a good investment for them. They're not a charity. There are grants out there that will let you do that if that's the path you need to go, which are hard, long timelines, all that kind of stuff, but you need to keep that in mind. So keep that in mind. This business execution part of it, I think we take for granted because we talk about it every day, but prioritizing what are the biggest unknowns in this business part of the whole triangle, the trifecta of kind of areas, and then going and de-risking those. I like to talk in terms of how we prioritize these, and my most simple way of thinking about how to prioritize a couple keys are death blow uncertainties. It's where we use it multiple times a week when we talk about, is this a death blow? If we don't have an answer to this, will it kill us? Will this sink the company if we don't understand the answer to this uncertainty, or we haven't de-risked this uncertainty? It could be product, it could be market, it could be business. We all feel the pressure of not having funding and not having the runway we'd like. like. So, that one is often the one that boils to the top. I need to go hit the streets and fundraise. But there are other things that even if you had all the funds in the world will completely destroy the company because you haven't de-risked that uncertainty. So we start there. We see what are the death blows. We don't know this. We're done. And I see you chuckling here, John. I can always tell the people who, played a lot of video games in the 90s when I put this Mortal Kombat reference up here, and you can hear in your head, like the finish him, like move at the end of it. I was definitely a child of the 90s video game era. So I always like the Mortal Kombat reference. I'll kind of leave you with one more piece, and we've talked a lot about this in some of the other talks. When you are thinking about how to prioritize these things, don't do it locked in a room by yourselves. Do it with input from your customers. Do it with input from the ecosystem you're operating in. We always think about the 3 Ps, the patients, the physicians, and the payers, but regulatory can sync your product. Hospital purchasing and the health economics can sync it as well. Again, investors are your customers. You are selling them a product. So you need to understand what their priorities are and why they're not interested in funding them. I think Saul said it, go through these investors and practice on some of them. I would even take that a step further. I would say, go out there, and even if somebody's not going to invest, and a lot of times you don't find that out till halfway through your conversation, make sure you ask them how they prioritize investments. What do you look for in a good investment? You need to understand your customer, even if what you're selling them is that investment, not your product. And that's something that I was very diligent about because I came out of Gore knowing I know how to develop medical products. I've done that before. I know what regulatory looks like. I know how to build a quality system. I know how to do all of the vendor management. What I don't understand is this fundraising ecosystem. And so I spent a lot of time talking to a lot of investors before we ever asked for a dime, because I wanted to understand what their priorities are, how they approach these, what they're looking for. I'll give you one beer reference as well. When I was running Wanderlust Brewing Company and my bartenders hated this, I forced them to put me on the schedule to work behind the bar one day a month. And I did it for 8 years up until we hit COVID. And I didn't go back on the schedule after that. But I did that because I wanted to understand what my customers wanted. I can brew all the beers that I like all day long, but at the end of the day, I'm not the one buying it. My customers are the ones buying it. They'd end up scheduling me with another bartender as well because they knew I was just going to sit there and talk to the customers, and I didn't know how to run the register half the time, and I was really slow. But it gave me that firsthand interaction, sitting across the bar, serving somebody a beer, asking them why they like it, why they don't like it, which one of these they ordered, all that kind of stuff, how it compared to other things they've drank. And it's a simplistic view of this whole customer interaction process. And it's a very different scenario when you're going in and trying to find that customer in this very imposing looking hospital. You're trying to figure out who it is who makes these decisions. But fundamentally, it's the same process. Go out and find that feedback, take that back, use it as a data point. Again, scientific method says one data point you shouldn't make a decision off of. So go and get 2 and 3 or 4 or 5, ask a couple different people and start triangulating, and use that to prioritize your uncertainties, and make sure that if you've got one that keeps coming up over and over and over again and is looking like it's going to be a roadblock, you better think about how you're going to prioritize that next to the other ones. So I'll give you a quick summary here. I want you to think about focusing on uncertainties, not necessarily tasks, because the tasks will come out of those uncertainties once you identify them. And I'll also say this is just one model. You've seen a couple other models. You could probably go on your LinkedIn feed and scroll down and find 5 other ways to categorize these uncertainties and slice and dice them. At the end of the day, find one that works for you. I like simple. Simple is better to me because I can check in on a regular basis. I don't have to sit down and open a spreadsheet. I can sit down and have a conversation with my co-founder and say, hey, I think we need to revisit some of the technical uncertainties. Are we prioritizing this right? And it's a quick conversation. We bring in the data, or we say, we're going to go get some of that information. And that allows you to prioritize on what matters so that you're not chasing down shiny objects, or you're not going off and redirecting the whole company based on one comment from one investor or something like that. Tackle those death blows first. If it's going to sink the company, don't sweep it under the rug. Go tackle it head on, figure out the reality there. If you need to pivot because of that, do it. If you need to go in and find more information, or you need to figure out how to overcome that, call in other people. And also, don't work in a vacuum. Talk to your customers, talk to your co-founders, talk to your fellow CEOs in this industry. I've found that because this is such a difficult place to do development in the medtech world, people are very collaborative. If you have the courage to pick up the phone, give somebody a call, drop them a message on LinkedIn, more often than not, they're going to be willing to at least chat with you, and you'll find some common ground on all of these struggles skills that we've all had together. So make sure you're doing that. And I'll leave this by saying, this is Sedona, this picture. This is my friend Mike. If you're ever out in Arizona, you want to go for a mountain bike ride, you want to go for a hike, or even go for a ski in the winter, give me a call. We'd love to have you. This is how I process a lot of our uncertainties. I'll go out and go for a bike ride, and it kind of lets me just focus on what I need to think about without a million distractions. So we'd love to have you out here. And please look me up after this. Happy to take any questions now, but I'm always open for a discussion. Is happy to share any of this information, slide deck, whatever I can.
Fantastic, Nathan.